I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Netflix sets the bar, leading the charge for the next quarter of big tech earnings, and the stock pops on user growth. We'll break it all down. Plus, Tesla's second time out. This week, the electric car manufacturer stopped production on its Model 3 sedans and sent its workers home, only to then reverse course and declare a 24/7 operation. We will explain. And paying for Prime. Jeff Bezos says Amazon's premium subscribers have topped more than 100 million. First to our lead, Netflix shares popped this week after reporting the strongest start to the year since the company went public 16 years ago. The streaming pioneer added 7.4 million subscribers in the first quarter, beating the estimate of 6.4 million. Netflix now has more than 125 million paying customers, the most of any online TV network. The company is the best performing stock in the S&P 500 this year, proving one quarter at a time that investors' confidence in its online TV service is justified. We dug into the numbers on Monday right after they came out with Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde, who caught up with eMarketer analyst Paul Verna from Boston and Henry Lake Fox, CEO of Founders Factory, a tech-focused venture capital firm.
They're making shows that everybody wants to watch. So as long as that's the case, then people are going to subscribe and stay with Netflix. So it's been an amazing story for them.
An amazing story that they have just continued to be able to show that as they expand their user base, they are indeed also able to up the prices consistently. I mean, are you expecting these sorts of heady heights, the amount of numbers they're seeing, the subscription numbers they're seeing, the revenue they're bringing on, to be able to be repeated quarter after quarter?
I don't know if the kind of growth that they've posted in the last three quarters is sustainable on a percentage basis. I think at some point they reach saturation and they get to a point where they really can't post those kinds of revenue increases every quarter. But I do think that as long as they keep, making these great shows, that people will continue to tune in. They still have a lot of international expansion ahead of them, so they're on a good track. They're not going to sustain these kinds of numbers forever, but they also, I think anyone waiting for the other shoe to drop for Netflix is going to have to keep waiting for a while.
Yeah, Henry, I mean, this is phenomenal user growth that we're seeing. Content is king. Can anyone play catch-up?
Well, that's a great question, Caroline, and I think it is interesting to look at the landscape of people who might yet find a way to compete with Netflix. Amazon is clearly one company who has started to invest very heavily in original content, has a lot of data on users, has a very big distribution channel it could deploy. I think it's an open question whether anybody will catch Netflix. I remain a Netflix bull, but I think that it's interesting to think around how Disney might find a way yet to compete. If you play forwards a couple of years in an imaginary world and believe that Disney does manage to acquire 20th Century Fox and goes live with its planned streaming service, I think bringing its historical archive, bringing the very high quality production focus that it has in the movie sphere, and the ability to weave in merchandise in a way that maybe Netflix has not yet been able to do, to be able to increase its ARPU, could yet become a competitor.
Fascinating points that Henry brings up there, Paul. Where are you seeing the competitive landscape? I mean, do people just have more subscriptions to more different types of products, or is it a winner-takes-all expectation here?
Well, there has been a rising tide with more and more subscription services and more spending on them, and no sign of that slowing down yet. Like everything else, that's not sustainable either. I agree with Henry that competition is coming from all quarters. The companies he mentioned, certainly Fox and Disney, big competitors, and especially if they tie up. And then you do have Amazon, you have Hulu, and you have potential competitors like Apple and Facebook that really haven't tipped their hands fully in this game yet. But once they start, they have the kinds of budgets that Netflix has been throwing around. And they have the expertise, the relationships, so they could also give Netflix some serious competition going forward.
I mean, talking of perhaps how the share price has performed and whether there's competition there, I'm diving into my Bloomberg GTV if you want to look yourself, and you can just see how Netflix has left the rest for dust when it comes to share performance. We're up 60% so far year to date. They're in the yellow. We are seeing a vast outperformance versus the likes of Amazon in the blue, versus the likes of Alphabet in the purple, Apple in the pink. So clearly they're streets ahead in that respect. Henry, what about the world you're looking at, the startup world? Are there people trying to emulate what Netflix does, build on what Netflix does, or the subscription model in any way?
Absolutely. So I think we look at Founders Factory, we look at the industry at large, the whole of media. That's a very broad remit for us. We do see increasing numbers of subscription models across all different media formats, actually, from traditional press publishing and twists on those models through to reinventing audio and podcasts, right through to film and TV subscriptions as well. I think there's a huge allure in subscription models from an investor perspective. They tend to be very sticky revenue patterns. They're very predictable revenue sources. And at the same time, there is a very large barrier to entry as it becomes clearer that extremely high quality production content is required to lure people onto these subscription packages. But it's an area we see an enormous amount of activity, littered gravestones all over the place over the last 5 years of people who've tried to play in paid content and failed. But I think the tide is beginning to change, and consumers begin to understand now that there is a proper value exchange in being a customer and not being a product of these services. I often cite the Guardian Media Group, our investor in Founders Factory, who are actually having a very strong subscription increase now in their revenue streams. So I think there are opportunities not just for new companies, but for traditional media businesses to reinvent themselves along the Netflix model.
That's interesting. I mean, Paul, I'm also looking at, you said really anyone who's been betting against Netflix is probably going to continue to fail in this respect. I'm looking at short interest in Netflix at the moment, and that's just continued to tail off. If you go into Bloomberg and go into GTV, once again, you can see in the white line how we've just seen a continued upward trend in the Netflix share price, but in the blue line, a continued downward trend in terms of short interest, where it, only just 4% of all equity that is floating is currently shorted. Do you remain, out the game if you're going to be a bear on Netflix? Do you think that this is really a bull's view of the world?
I think Netflix always has and is still playing the long game. And one thing that's interesting about content libraries is that they're cumulative. They build up. You invest in content, and it's always there for you to return to. A show that's popular today may go through some ups and downs, but eventually people come back to it. They want to tune in to the next season of a show. So I think Netflix has been doing that very, very well, building interest and retaining their customer base. And as long as they keep doing that, they may have some ups and downs in future quarters, but I don't see the story changing for the worse unless really the market underneath them tanks or something drastic happens to their business or the content. But it's really, as long as they keep doing what they're doing, they're going to keep succeeding, and they're also going to have that back library to fall back on.
That was Caroline speaking with Paul Verna, analyst at eMarketer, and Founders Factory CEO Henry Lane Fox. We got some details on Facebook this week on what data it collects from users when they're logged out of the social media site, and even when they don't have a Facebook account at all. Websites and apps that use Facebook services to serve more targeted content and ads send information back to the social network on all users. In an online statement, the social media giant said that users can opt out of these kinds of ads entirely. Meantime, the company announced it is branching out, building a team to design its own semiconductors. This is part of a bigger trend among tech companies to supply themselves and lower their dependence on big chip makers like Intel and Qualcomm. The social network would join other giants working to develop their own chips, including Apple and Alphabet's Google. Coming up this week, Tesla suspended production of the Model 3 sedan, and CEO Elon Musk acknowledged using too many robots to assemble them. That story ahead. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Tesla is shifting into overdrive to try and resolve its Model 3 production problems. After earlier reports that the electric car manufacturer was temporarily halting production on the sedan, Jalopnik then reported that Tesla will begin round-the-clock production at its Fremont, California plant. Elon Musk spent time on Twitter last week acknowledging the production problems and arguing with The Economist magazine, saying Tesla will be profitable and cash flow positive this year. So just what is happening on the Tesla production line? To answer that, we spoke with Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin, who's been covering the turmoil at Tesla on Tuesday.
Although Elon Musk appears to be working 24/7, famously, as he's told pretty much everyone who listened, sleeping at the factory, these 24/7 shifts are shifts, right? So it'd be like probably 3 different crews of people. It's not as if these Tesla employees are working around the clock, although many executives probably are. The other thing that's happening here is Musk is saying in this memo, which was published by Jalopnik just a few minutes ago, that the plan here is to have the shutdown and then to sort of ramp up. Now, we saw a similar kind of shutdown followed by a ramp up a few weeks back, which allowed them to hit this 2,000 unit milestone that we saw at the end of last quarter. The plan now, he's saying, is they want to be at 6,000 by the end of the second quarter. And he says in this memo, which is a sort of a fascinating look at the psychology of Elon Musk, that the idea here is to build a little cushion so that even if they fall short of the 6,000, which Tesla has been wanting to do, they'll probably get 5,000, which is the goal that they've been sort of promising to investors all along. There's also information about a plan to add lots more employees. He said that they're going to be adding 400 employees a week to their 2 factories in the coming weeks, and a really big push for profit to make sure that Tesla gets to profitability.
Tesla shares are up on the news. Here's a quote from Musk in that memo: "We are burning the midnight oil to burn the midnight oil." That said, Max, obviously the production halt, not good news. How bad is this bad news in the grander scheme of things?
So it's really hard to know, and I really caution people into reading into the tea leaves too much, because the thing is that production halts, as Tesla has said, are sort of something that happens. Now the thing is, something that happens not just at Tesla but at lots of companies, you have to reset the line or make sure the tooling's right, or there are reasons to stop production that are not bad. That said, there have been lots of these sort of unexpected things, and that would cause somebody who's kind of a Tesla skeptic, and there are lots of those out there, to see this as just yet another sign that this company is in over its head. That said, if the numbers keep moving in the right direction, I think investors are going to be happy, and Elon Musk will look like a genius.
What do you make of Elon's comments last week on CBS that he overdid it on automation?
So that's a huge shift, because one of the key things that Tesla had been talking about as a differentiator is that this was going to be the most automated car factory in the world. That was going to allow them to hit these crazy ambitious production numbers. The problem, as we've been learning with automation, is that it's harder to plug people in. And what it seems like is happening in the factory when you sort of start pulling different sort of little tidbits that are filtering out of there is Tesla is moving much more towards a traditional sort of human-focused manufacturing process, which is why they're adding all of these employees, which is why they're adding shifts, and which is why they have to focus on profit, because they spent all of this money on these machines, which is supposed to save money in the long run, but now you have to add employees on top of that. So that's going to create a lot of cost pressure on a company that already doesn't have is already losing money.
So shares are up, but at what point might customers start asking for their deposits back? If that's not happening already.
Yeah, this is a sort of superpower that Tesla has, which is that people are super fans of this company. And I think in terms of those who have already, put down the deposit, this is about 500,000 people, this is not their primary car. So, and we're only talking about $1,000. So I think we're still a long ways off from that. That said, the longer this drags out and the more we get these delays and you're going to start to see other car companies coming out with compelling products, the greater the danger is for Tesla. And it's not so much about these customers asking for their money back as investors sort of buying into a larger vision of Tesla Tesla as potentially, the biggest auto manufacturer in the U.S. If all they have are the customers who put in deposits, that's not going to be good enough. They need to, keep adding these giant cohorts of customers basically each year to sort of hit the vision that Elon Musk is talking about.
Now, I do want to acknowledge the tweeting. Elon Musk continuing his sort of adversarial relationship with the media. This tweet to The Economist. The Economist used to be boring but smart with a wicked dry wit. Now it's just boring. Sigh. Another tweet talking about how ideas pop into his head. A follower asked, what were you thinking when you came up with such and such? And he said, too wasted to remember. At what point do investors start getting distracted by the state of mind here?
Okay, so he has always been a pugnacious sort, and I think that is part of the appeal. That's part of what people like about him. In terms of the tweeting and things like that, I think that the sort of probably greater area of concern would be all these sort of side projects. In addition to Tesla and SpaceX, there is an AI thing. There's the tunnel thing. This is a guy. He's apparently hiring humorists from The Onion, and so I think it's more about sort of distraction in terms of possible danger to Tesla, rather than Elon Musk tweeting intemperate things. I think many of his admirers, enjoy the intemperate comments, and certainly for us in the press, it gives us something to talk about. So I don't think it's definitely an area of risk.
Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin there. Coming up, Microsoft President Brad Smith joins us. Why more than 30 major tech companies, including Microsoft, Facebook, and Dell, are joining forces to fight cyber attacks. This is Bloomberg. U.S. regulators moved to extend a crackdown on China equipment makers, backing a ban on federal subsidies to buy networking gear from manufacturers like Huawei and ZTE. The Federal Communications Commission voted 5-0 on Tuesday in favor of banning federal funds from being spent on companies deemed a U.S. national security risk. The ban won't be final until a second vote by the FCC. These steps coming as trade tensions grow between the U.S. and China. Well, yet another Chinese technology company is headed for an IPO. Tencent-backed Meili Shou is said to be seeking an IPO at a $4 billion valuation. The online fashion retailer is said to be in talks with several investment banks for the U.S. deal. As of 2016, Meili Shou had about 15,000 merchants on its site and 100 million downloads for its mobile app. Facebook, Microsoft, and 32 other tech companies have pledged to protect their customers from cyber attacks in a new commitment called the Cybersecurity Tech Accord. However, notably absent from the initial roster of signups are Apple, Amazon, Twitter, and Google. On Monday, U.S. and U.K. officials issued a joint warning about years of cyber attacks stemming from Russia aimed at both businesses and utilities, and in some cases, individuals. The warning was only the latest in a series about Russian threats to elections and electoral systems. We spoke with Brad Smith, Microsoft president.
I think our industry really needs to come together on a global basis to strengthen cybersecurity. We need to be principled as we do that. And there's fundamentally two principles that are part of this pledge. The first is that we will step up our work to protect every customer everywhere from these cyber attacks. And the second is that we won't help governments launch cyber attacks against innocent citizens or enterprises. And we'll use those as two North Stars, and there are a number of concrete steps we can and will take to make those effective.
So are governments asking you for help for them
Absolutely.
to perpetrate cyber attacks?
Oh, first of all, we get, most importantly, requests from governments every day to help defend against customers, and we are doing more in that space. In the world today, I think if your principles are unclear, you do run the risk that you'll be asked by governments to do things that you're going to look back at in hindsight and regret having done. And we've seen that over the last 15 or 20 years. And I think by being clear about what we will and will not do, we in effect give governments guidance so they don't have to ask us. They know where we stand.
So you've referred to this as the Digital Geneva Convention, yet Apple, Amazon, Twitter, Google, they're not signed up. Why not?
Well, I think we're going to see more companies sign up in the coming weeks and months. A lot of people have been very focused on a wide variety of privacy and security issues recently. We have 34 major companies with us today for this tech accord. And then what we are also doing is calling on governments to sign up for a digital Geneva Convention, in effect a new convention that would put new rules of the road in place so that governments understand that they can't attack civilians the way we're seeing in the world today.
Facebook has been in the spotlight for inadvertently allowing state actors to meddle in elections, in U.S. elections. Why should we think of this as any more than an empty promise or a marketing ploy?
Well, I first of all think that in the world today, it's important for companies to be principled. You can't be principled unless you define clearly and in a transparent way what you're going to do and what you're going to stand up for. And we're doing that. But I also believe that you're making a fundamentally important point. At the end of the day, people should not judge us by our words alone. They should judge us by our deeds. This gives people a clear standard against which they can judge us. I think we should welcome that. Now it's up to us to prove every day that we can live up to this pledge.
Facebook also, I'm sure as you well know, also under fire for data privacy. And I'm curious where you think Facebook went wrong and whether you think more regulation is necessary in big tech, since that could ultimately impact Microsoft as well.
Well, I think it's the broader question that is the most important. It's a question for all of us. We at Microsoft called for national comprehensive privacy legislation. We did that in 2005, 13 years ago. This whole privacy issue does not get better with age. We do need to come together as a country, in our view, and we will benefit from having good laws in place. We'll benefit because there'll be a consensus nationally about what companies should do, and we'll benefit because that, I believe, can play an important role in sustaining the trust and confidence of the public.
You've also announced a new Defending Democracy program to help prevent campaigns from being hacked, to defend against disinformation, misinformation. Can you give us some specifics about how you intend to do that? Are you working with particular campaigns or particular states, or working to secure voting machines, for example, ahead of the midterm elections?
The answer is basically going to be yes to all of that. We have identified 4 specific areas on which we want to focus with this new Defending Democracy project. The first is protecting candidates and campaigns from hacking. The second is protecting voters and voting from tampering or hacking. The third is really supporting measures to ensure integrity in political advertising, including on social media platforms, one of the things the Honest Ads Act will do. And the last is really, in some ways, the hardest. It's the job we all need to do to try to address the willful disinformation campaigns we're seeing even from foreign sources. And so in some of these areas, we have fast steps that we can take right away. In other areas, I think we have a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we need to get started.
So also, last quick question. You're announcing a new micro device product, a teeny tiny little IoT product that is secured end to end, could be in anything from toys to remote controls, works with AWS, works with Google Cloud. What are the dangers here that you're trying to protect against?
Well, this, I believe, is a fundamentally important problem for the country and the world, because this year there will be shipped in the world 9 billion of these small chips that increasingly are going into toys, refrigerators, thermostats, certainly in cars and the like, and they're all going to be connected. And if they're connected without being protected, then we have a much bigger cybersecurity problem than we do today.
Microsoft President Brad Smith there. Coming up, tech takes on malaria. We'll talk to the man who went from creating Microsoft to trying to rid the world of one of its deadliest diseases. Our conversation with Bill Gates is next. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Today, technology is playing an ever more present role in healthcare provision. In particular, new developments in data analytics software and AI are increasingly able to help stem the spread of infectious disease. One man who knows the benefits of the technology well is Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft and the world's second richest man. He's long been focusing his wealth outside the world of Silicon Valley on combating infectious diseases that affect the poorest. Caroline Hyde caught up with a tech luminary at the Malaria Summit in London.
I think focusing has always been on data, the use of big data, the ability to map, to be able to track outbreaks and be able to target them. Notably, we're also hearing the likes of Google Earth being able to help monitor the outbreaks of such diseases, and indeed just the use of smartphones on the ground. But it made me perhaps smile somewhat that the founder of the biggest software company in the world, Bill Gates, of course, thinks perhaps the key use should be in software itself. Have a listen.
Some of the more advanced software techniques are used to model the disease. And so we run rich simulations. We had to create a new group, Institute for Disease Modeling, to use the very latest software to try and project if we get a new drug, how beneficial would that be? And should we go after the mosquitoes or go after the human reservoir? Even drug design, some of the advanced modeling techniques are letting us speed up that process of picking molecules and making sure they don't have side effects. So, anything that helps, cure malaria, cure cancer, that's a lot of human benefit coming out of that.
Technology really was front and foremost in a lot of this discussion at the Malaria Summit today.
And, he has previously talked about how technology can be used for bad, though, in this case, using for good. What are his thoughts in particular about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, you're right. We've heard from him in the past talking about potentially taxing robots, and within artificial intelligence, he's been blogging about it himself, saying how he's not quite yet convinced about the future of AI in terms of its control, about where then the role of institutions is in ensuring that, well, artificial intelligence is in the right hands of the right people. I wanted to really get his view on perhaps where the future of technology goes, if it is indeed a smooth path or not. And seemingly clearly, he thinks there are bumps in the road, and governments have a role to play here. Have a listen.
Every technology brings with it both a lot of advance. The automobile net is a very good thing, but it brought in huge safety challenges. Here, where you're communicating online, the government's going to be involved in deciding what is hate speech that should be censored versus what's free speech. Not a simple issue. Only the government gets to draw that line. So yes, government is very important to look at why these new technologies may need new rules to go with them.
New rules in the future. Talking of hate speech, it made me really rather think that he was hinting at what Facebook had just been facing on Capitol Hill, Emily.
On that note, Gates himself was at the center of congressional testimony a couple of decades ago. What are his thoughts on Facebook and whether Facebook and big tech at large should be better regulated?
Yeah, I think he wouldn't actually go as far as to say, yes, regulation is necessary, particularly for the likes of Facebook. That's what I asked him directly. I said, should Facebook be regulated? And he seemed to think that perhaps it's unavoidable, but didn't say necessary. Have a listen.
There are privacy rules. Those rules will continue to evolve as people see, what's going on. And Europe's got a new round of privacy rules, but every 2 or 3 years, I think you'll see more activity there.
I asked him, look, any advice for the man, Mark Zuckerberg, as he comes up in front of regulators? I mean, he's a man who has experience in it, but he just gave a smile and seemed to think that, well, these things will come.
Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London. Sticking with philanthropic tech giants, the man who sits ahead of Gates for the world's richest man title is trying to make his mark in the battle against cancer. The Jeff Bezos-backed cancer startup called Grail is seeking to raise $1 billion to boost growth ahead of its planned IPO. Grail, which plans to list in Hong Kong this year, is trying to create screenings that can diagnose people with early-stage cancer before they show any symptoms. Another of Grail's investors is none other than Bill Gates. Still ahead, Apple jitters mounted on Wall Street this week after a supplier announced a sales miss. We'll head to Asia next. This is Bloomberg.
Get the edge you need to stay ahead. Subscribe to Bloomberg Businessweek and receive 4 bonus issues free. Bloomberg Businessweek delivers in-depth reporting and provocative perspectives that take you inside the news each week. Bloomberg's 2,400 journalists worldwide dig deep for stories and insight you can't find anywhere else. Take advantage of this special offer. Order now to get 4 free bonus issues of the only business magazine powered by Bloomberg. Go to businessweekmag.com/TV offer.
The Defense Department isn't budging from its decision to award a single contract for a cloud computing project and isn't saying why, even in a public exchange with vendors this week over details of the multi-billion-dollar competition. Rival contractors like Oracle are complaining that the winner-take-all approach favors Amazon, the biggest supplier of cloud services. IBM, another potential bidder, says no major commercial enterprise should risk a single cloud solution, and neither should the Pentagon. Meantime, Google's former CEO thinks that big tech companies should be working with the Pentagon when it comes to artificial intelligence. Appearing before the House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday, Eric Schmidt said that AI will be, quote, useful for defensive and perhaps offensive purposes, and that any efforts to make it easier for the Pentagon to work with the private sector would be welcome. One problem, though, his former employees don't agree. Over 3,000 Google employees wrote to CEO Sundar Pichai, current CEO, demanding an end to deals that let the military use the company's AI technology. Now, Amazon shares gained after CEO Jeff Bezos sent his annual letter to shareholders. In it, he touted the company surpassing more than 100 million paid Prime members. He also said he will continue to invest to meet ever-rising customer expectations. We spoke with Spencer Soper, who covers Amazon for Bloomberg, as well as RBC Capital Markets analyst Mark Mahaney, just as the news was breaking on Wednesday.
The music streaming sub number, so this is what we know in the market. There's a recently publicly traded company that has north of 70 million, based on its public disclosures, north of 70 million paying streaming subs. Apple has been very clear about how many they have. They now have 40 million. So, you know, Amazon's got a lot of work to do to catch up to those two, and it probably doesn't. I'm not sure Amazon needs to catch up to those two, but it's a nice service, and it'll be nice incremental business for them. Again, the golden ring for Amazon is getting people to sign up for the Prime program. So if music or video gets them to do that, great. And by the way, it has been great because they got 100 million of these. And then finally, in terms of the hardware sales, this is what really matters for Amazon, I think, we think, is that getting about 100 million of these Alexa devices out and installed, then you get an ecosystem, and then you can start getting what we call Apple tax or Google tax revenue, like a share of all the apps that are sold indirectly or indirectly off those platforms. So the hardware sales were a record year last year for Amazon. I don't find too surprising. We're looking to see how many installed units there are of Alexa devices. We think they get to that 100 million installed device Alexas by the end of, maybe by the end of this year, but certainly somewhere in 19.
I am reading through the shareholder letter now from Jeff Bezos, and I want to bring in Spencer Soper, who covers Amazon for Bloomberg, with us in Seattle. Jeff Bezos here, Spencer, saying, one thing I love about customers is that they are divinely discontent. Their expectations are never static. They go up. It is human nature. You cannot rest on your laurels in this world. Customers won't have it. And he goes on to say, of course, that they will continue to invest for the long term. What are the highlights, Spencer, that you're pulling out of this?
Yeah, I think that the 100 million Prime members is the big takeaway. Otherwise, it's a lot of familiar themes and just kind of like a highlight reel of stats we've seen over the past year. So, but the big thing really is that 100 million Prime subscribers, and it's something that they use as kind of a building block. It's a foundation for them, and we're seeing them more and more add additional tiers to that. Like if you want to pay a little more and get music, great. Do you want to pay a little more and get more video, great. Do you want to pay a little more and get, service like Amazon Fresh? It's become this kind of platform that they can build upon with more a la carte services to make Amazon Prime more valuable.
So he talks about Prime Video, he talks about Amazon devices. Interestingly, he talks about fashion. Amazon has become the destination for tens of millions of customers to shop for fashion. This is really interesting, given obviously the competition in retail, in brick and mortar retail, and the challenges facing the retail industry today. Do you think, Mark, that Amazon can become a huge player in fashion, or really a go-to?
I wonder about that. They're clearly very large already in clothing and apparel. So and I'm not the expert on fashion, far from it. But in terms of plain, regular clothing and apparel, yes. High-end fashion, however, that may not work for Amazon. That may be too hard to stretch the brand that far, and that may be where a potential acquisition of a high-end retailer, may make a lot of sense. They clearly are doing very well in kind of. Well, what's been rumored is...
What could be on the radar?
Well, what's rumored is that other high-end retailer that's based in Seattle that begins with an N, Nordstrom. So that, would Amazon buy a Target? Absolutely not. They don't need to buy any mass-market discount retailers. They are the leading mass-market discount retailer of the future. But would they look to like a complementary acquisition of like a high-end fashion retailer like that? Possibly, if it's a high-quality brand, high-quality management, et cetera. That's what I wonder about. But anyway, that's Amazon in fashion. By the way, Emily, we've gone through all of this. Now, we haven't mentioned AWS. That must be in the shareholder letter because that's where half of the profits of this business are. So I don't know where I haven't seen the letter yet. I don't know where that is. I know, and Amazon investors should be looking for that AWS language because that's the half of the story going forwards.
Absolutely, it is here. It is exciting to see Amazon Web Services, a $20 billion revenue run rate business, accelerate. It's already healthy growth. Spencer, talk to us about the growth of AWS and what the company expects to see.
Well, it really is the fuel for all of Amazon, and it's the thing that gets Amazon a lot of leeway from investors about all of its other kind of very low margin or even money-losing initiatives, including its international expansion. Without Amazon's cloud computing segment, Amazon would have been about break even last year. So it's basically fueling everything from its investments in voice-activated devices on the Alexa platform to its original video programming that's helping it get people more engaged and get Amazon deeper into people's homes, to its international expansion, namely, where it's trying to replicate its success in the U.S. abroad, which is really the thing that's fueling more and more revenue growth. But yeah, AWS is the fuel for all of that.
That was Bloomberg Spencer Soper and RBC Capital Markets analyst Mark Mahaney. Well, faith in Apple's iPhone business may be wavering. The unease on Wall Street comes after Taiwan Semiconductor, a major Apple supplier, announced a forecast for second quarter sales that fell short. This comes after the IMF noted this week that the global smartphone market may have peaked and that shipments declined for the first time. We went live to Tokyo to get the view from Asia with Bloomberg Tech's Peter Alstrom.
TSMC is particularly closely watched. It's a key chip maker in the supply chain with Apple, and they give these forecasts. We were able to dig out this information a bit early in the presentation yesterday, where their forecast for next quarter is quite a bit lower than people had anticipated. And as you saw in the market today, that was taken as a negative sign, not just for TSMC, but for the others that kind of depend on it, beginning with Apple, including others in the supply chain for smartphones in particular.
So, talk to us about what we're seeing with Qualcomm here. More job cuts, a probe in China. What's the latest?
Well, the probe in China is a bit concerning at this point. So Qualcomm has to go to the Chinese government to get approval for this acquisition of NXP. They proposed that more than a year ago, and it's been dragging on and on and on. And so what China's regulator, the Ministry of Commerce, said yesterday is this is the first time they've said this on the record, that in fact they have been reviewing the deal and that Qualcomm has been offering some remedies, and they are not sufficient at this point. So Qualcomm had to pull back back that application and then refile the application and set this new deadline 3 months from now. And what they want is they want some reassurances that the combination between the two companies is not going to have detrimental effects for its domestic companies in particular. They buy a lot of semiconductors in China to put into different products that are then shipped around the world, so they have a big say in this deal.
How does this fit into the trade tensions happening now?
Well, Qualcomm and MOFCOM would like to say that this doesn't have anything to do with the tensions between the U.S. and China, but it appears it could become a bargaining chip between the two countries as they're trying to work out these trade negotiations. Of course, Donald Trump has threatened tariffs against China for practices that his administration has called unfair. In response, China has responded with its own tensions. And then earlier this week, you saw this very dramatic move where the Commerce Department in the U.S. decided to cut off ZTE, the big telecom equipment maker, from buying any kind of components from American suppliers. That's critical. That includes Qualcomm, not coincidentally. And so Qualcomm's approval from the Chinese regulators may end up getting caught up with these other negotiations over exactly what the tariffs are going to be or what kind of approvals, what kind of practices Chinese companies are going to be able to use as they work with the United States.
That was Bloomberg Technology's Peter Elstrom from Tokyo. In other news, the tech giant announced this week plans to integrate its recently acquired magazine app Texture into Apple News and debut its own premium subscription offering. People familiar with the matter say the iPhone maker wants to generate more revenue from online content and services. Apple agreed to buy Texture last month. The app allows users to subscribe to more than 200 magazines at $9.99 a month. An upgraded Apple News app with a subscription offering is expected to launch next year. Up next, Etsy CEO Josh Silverman joins on this week's multi-billion-dollar U.S. Supreme Court hearing on online sales tax. This is Bloomberg.
This is news, but not as you know it. This is TikTok by Bloomberg, the first and only global news network built for Twitter. 24/7 news streaming live on Twitter.
Cambridge Analytica may have harvested even more data than the already known 87 million Facebook users. This, according to a second whistleblower who came forward. Brittany Kaiser testified before a UK parliamentary panel that the company used a wide assortment of surveys to gather data. Meantime, Alexander Nix, the former CEO of Cambridge Analytica, refused to appear before the very same panel. Nix's legal team claims that he could appear due to the Information Commissioner's ongoing investigation into the matter. The panels rejected his excuse and said it's considering a formal summons for Nix to appear. A debate over online sales tax was at the center of a multi-billion-dollar U.S. Supreme Court case on Tuesday, and Supreme Court justices signaled they are divided about whether to let states start collecting billions of dollars in sales tax from internet retailers that don't currently charge tax to their customers. President Trump weighed in on Twitter Tuesday, accusing internet retailers of cheating. Justices are considering overturning their 1992 ruling that made much of the internet a tax-free zone by exempting retailers who don't have a physical presence in the state. If overturned, this would put new pressure on online retailers that don't always collect taxes, including Amazon, eBay, Etsy, and thousands of smaller merchants. We spoke with Etsy CEO Josh Silverman on Monday ahead of the hearing.
What we're talking about here is the new Main Street, the digital Main Street, being subject to a patchwork of 10,000 different tax jurisdictions, where our sellers, micro businesses really, are asked to comply with an unmanageable number of tax laws.
So complexity abound. What about whether or not there's a risk that you could see back taxes as well being collected? Is that a risk of yours, or do you think that's not on the agenda?
Most important thing is, let's take an example. One of our sellers selling in the state of Washington, she sells marshmallow pops and she sells pecan bars. It turns out that marshmallow pops are qualified as a candy, which has no tax because it doesn't include flour and doesn't need to be refrigerated, where pecan bars are classified as baked goods. And so she needs to know that in order to be complying with the tax jurisdiction of one jurisdiction within the state of Washington, unless perhaps it's back to school, in which case there might be a tax holiday. In the state of Connecticut, she needs to know whether the sandals she sells are for athletic purposes or not, unless they're being bought by, for example, someone from the PTA, in which case they might have a tax holiday. So the challenge here is that there is a really unmanageable number of jurisdictions for which no small seller could truly comply.
So back tax is perhaps not on the agenda, but the complexity is front and foremost. If the Supreme Court doesn't overturn this rule, for example, Josh, what do you think we might see state by state start to crack down on this in some way? And how do you manage your business for that future?
Right. So it's not about back taxes. It is about forward-looking, and it is exactly about state by state. So about 25 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that individual states cannot force people that do not have presence in their state, do not have physical jurisdiction in their state, to comply with each and every tax jurisdiction. That's what's at risk right now. So if that ruling gets overturned, then a micro seller who sells, let's say, on Etsy from her living room will suddenly need to comply with over 10,000 different tax jurisdictions. The way it works right now, if she doesn't have physical presence in a particular state, then she's not subject to the tax jurisdictions within that state.
Have you put in place provisions for if it indeed is overturned? I mean, have you factored in extra costs to your business in this respect of having to comply?
It's more than cost, really. It's about how much time is she going to have to spend trying to comply. So, of course, we're going to have the backs of our sellers. But should the Supreme Court overturn the Quill ruling, which is what's being discussed today, it would likely go to Congress. And then Congress would need to decide how to make this manageable for sellers. The worst case scenario, we think, is that every state gets to impose its own tax rules on every single person who sells into that state. That's really going to create terrible friction for sellers, and it's going to really hold back jobs, and it's going to hold back the success of micro entrepreneurs, so much of the economic engine of our current economy.
Talk to us about having the back of your sellers, because notably KeyBank have been saying that you're improving your service for your sellers at the moment, going to be helping them target potential shoppers that much more. But many feel that perhaps you've abandoned them when going into bricks and mortar, actually within state by state. Well, what are you doing for your own sellers, your own customers? We've
been working very hard to make the Etsy platform an even better platform for buyers, which will make it work even harder for sellers. And we've been seeing terrific progress. So sales have been accelerating quarter over quarter. In fact, in the fourth quarter, we did over $1 billion of sales. So the work that we've been doing has really paid off, and our sellers are being more successful selling more product as a result.
That was Josh Silverman, CEO of Etsy. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We're going to bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Be sure to tune in next week. Full earnings coverage, a slew of big tech set to report. Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and Intel. Tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.
In San Francisco, a lot of tech action today.
Our top stories this morning in D.C. and
the Dow and the S&P.
Shall we? So the euro on a 7-day
sizable moves in the currency market, averages down 0.5%.
We begin in the oil patch. Saudi Arabia.
Brent crude
oil
pretty much unchanged.
Welcome to Bloomberg, the First Word Asia.
The U.S. and Japan duke it out over exchange.
China's slumping onshore bond market is